Well, hey folks, we here at Total Party Skills at the King Waspinator Studios have been hard at work all morning, bringing you the content you desire by recycling one of my oldest videos that I have on the topic of role-playing games and Dungeons & Dragons. This was originally recorded right at the very beginning of the pandemic in early 2020, prior to actually me even meeting Mrs. Waspinator. So, I guess in that way, it's a little bit of a time relic. Also, because of recent events, and just because I'm an asshole in my heart, I feel like editing out any clips of me saying the words Dungeons and Dragons, just to make sure everything is compliant and I don't have to worry about the good folks there at WotC thinking that I'm somehow obstructing them in their quest for money. So, you know, I'll probably be referencing Iron Falcon, so you'll just cut to me saying Iron Falcon. Otherwise, it's basically just going to be the video as it was. It's a little long. I completely explain how to write a first-level adventure for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition in mind for the idea of someone who's new to DMing, trying to run one and write one of their own instead of using a published adventure, and one that gives you a flexible format that you can kind of plug and play all sorts of different things into it to, you know, shape it so it, you know, you're still your own original creation. I'm just giving you a skeleton and fully lay everything out. It's about 50 minutes or so, so we'll see what it ends up being in the end by the time hit the save button here and upload it. And until then, you know, all the words and stuff. I guess this isn't an Indian video, so... Hey folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator, and welcome back to Total Party Skills! Yay!
Oh, hey. Oh. Hey there. It's your old pal, King Waspinator here. Now let's just imagine for a second that there's some sort of, speaking totally hypothetically here of course, some sort of global contagion sweeping the world, forcing everyone to have to stay indoors, whether or not they had to go to work or not. And that you're into a hobby such as tabletop gaming, and suddenly you find yourself no longer able to bring your player group over, be able to have your weekly sessions. Maybe this global pandemic drags on so long that you find yourself not even sure if you're even going to be able to pick up where you left off on the game that you were running. What are you, as a DM, going to be doing with your time? Well, my suggestion is to work a little bit on your adventure writing craft. And so here, just to kill some time for myself and to help any new, younger DMs or even more experienced DMs who are just looking for someone else's point of view on how to design adventures and campaign settings. So I'm just going to do a quick run through on my basic philosophy of adventure design and setting design. Right off the bat, we're doing this for Dungeons
Iron Falcon.
Dragons. All that I'm going to be referencing, and all you really need to be referencing in order to be able to create a completely fine-tuned, interesting, unique, and personally tailored setting is just the things to be found in the basic 3 core D&D books. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, Volo's Guide to Monsters, they're all well and good and offer interesting, additions to player races.
King Waspinator Studios disavow this relic from our own past. 2 years ago we used the term player races to describe the species that can be found in all exciting Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons products. I've been better informed now by the community and have seen the error of my ways. Please, yeah. Can I go home now?
And monsters and whatnot to face. And there seems to be kind of a general philosophy in
Iron Falcon.
D&D of always just wanting to add more options, more creatures to fight, more things for people to play. And I think that's kind of a bit of a mistake when it comes to when you're designing your own homebrew campaign setting. To me, I think the key to creating a personally tailored setting and adventure is to just go through the basic book and strip a bunch of stuff out of it. Things that are just no longer in the setting or never in the setting for the get-go. So, hopefully I'm not going to be under too much.
No comment?
The key is how you use the creatures, not the number of creatures and the variety of creatures that you have. And so, step 1. You need to go through your copy of the Monster Manual. Just on your own time. You don't have to read every last single page. You just need to just kind of thumb through the whole thing, take some notes, and you're going to want to determine the basic general presence, history, and the ultimate fate for several large categories of monsters and creatures and NPCs to be found in the Monster Manual. You want to know what the general state of the natural beasts are, and for the specific area that you're going to be setting your starting adventure in, you want to have a general sense of what kind of ecology is there. So you want to know what kind of animals, flora, and fauna that the players might be encountering, both in terms of natural livestock, peaceful critters that they're not likely to get into a fight with, but might still have some need to interact with. You want to know if there's squirrels in the forest that the characters are in. It's not that the characters are going to do battle with the squirrels, but the druid player character might be able to communicate with the squirrels, so you want to know that they're there and what they might be aware of, all that kind of stuff. Next up, you want to get a general sense of what sort of humanoids and civilized beasts are in your world, which ones you want to keep in, and which ones you're just going to ignore. They're either not in this area or they just don't exist in this setting at all.
We here at King Waspinator Studios disavow our past self from the year 2020 when we said that you should limit and select what player character species are allowed for players to play. Players can play whatever they want, whenever they want. You will do, as they say, unpaid for equality and other things. I just wanted this to be over, please. I did as you asked. I told them that the old white guy comment was okay. Just please make it stop.
You want to determine what kind of extraplanar beings. These include your angels, your Yugolos, devils, demons, all that kind of stuff. how much influence and presence they have in your setting. This could also influence whether or not you want to include certain player character races, such as Genasi, Tieflings, and Aasimar. You want to decide what sort of creatures of myth and legend are to be found. My thing about stripping stuff out of the monster manual isn't to say that the setting never had these things. It's just that maybe sphinxes and the cyclops and other like real strong mythological type beings, unicorns, all that kind of stuff, maybe they are part of the history of the world, but they haven't been seen in centuries. Similarly, you can treat most of these kind of general broad categories the same. When you get down to the Fae folk are next. Your various types of mystical fairy folk creatures, your Spriggans, satyrs, nymphs, harpies, all that kind of stuff. How much of a presence are they going to have in your setting, if any at all? How much are the undead a menace? Is it a case where, like, anytime the player characters, kill a bandit on the road and they neglect to bury the body, is that bandit going to raise from the dead because the world that this is in is real close to the Shadowfell? Or is the undead only something that appears when you have a specifically dedicated necromancer-type wizard? Or other sort of, entity or being that specifically raises and controls the undead? Is that the only occasions where you see the undead pop up? Are they uncommon or common? How close is this world to the lands of the dead? Similarly, you want to determine if dragons are around, and if they are, what role they play in the setting. Are they all over the place like they are in Faerun? Are they extremely rare? Do they live out in the wilderness, completely uncivilized, only caring themselves about dragon business? Or are they integrated into the setting itself, where they can actually hold positions of power and administration within the civilizations? These sorts of things need to be thought out. And a similar category, giants. All the same questions that I just asked about dragons, apply all that same matrix of thought to giants. Are they commonplace, or are they rare? Are they the stuff of legends, only rarely ever seen if you travel to some odd extreme environment in the setting? Or are hill giants used as common labor in the big cities?
Fucking capitalists, man, and their corporations.
That kind of stuff. And also, you want to determine the state of your Underdark and Underdark-themed creatures. Is there any presence for Duergar and Lithids and Myconids and all that kind of stuff? How much do you want the Underdark to actually relate to anything going on with your surface level campaign? Or do you want this to lean heavy into the Underdark stuff? Go ahead and just get a big, broad stroke idea in your head and take some basic notes for ideas you have as you go through the book, for how these major subcategories of creatures all relate to the setting that you're coming up with. Step 2. Limit your player character options.
The following section of this YouTube content has been removed for your safety.
So step 3. You want to start outlining what your introductory adventure and your starting setting are going to be. Now, to write a basic starting adventure, you want to get 2 experience targets. You want to have a basic XP budget to get at least 3 player characters from level 1 to level 3 by the end of the adventure, which in this case would be a total of 2,700 experience points. Now then, you also want to get a secondary budget. You want to figure out how much experience it would take to get 5 player characters to level 3. The idea is, you write an adventure outline, you already have it all ready to go, so that as soon as you get some players in and you have their characters rolled up, you can go ahead and start running the thing. You design it for a minimum of 3 people, and have it all mapped out and designed for 3 people. But then on the side, you have a few extra things, like some extra random encounters, or maybe some extra NPCs to beef up a few of the basic main encounters for the story, in case you have a larger player group, so that you can add the amount of experience and add to the challenge. Or you can just allow them a larger player character group to just blow through the basic model of the story. They're just not going to level up nearly as much. They might all barely make it to level 2 instead of all make it to level 3, which is fine. The longer you as a DM can stretch out the early parts of the game, the better. Because in truth, well, maybe not in truth, but in my opinion, the most fun adventuring to be had in D&D is with the lower level player characters. The stakes are a lot higher because they feel death is just one sword stroke away almost at any moment because they have the lower hit points, and it makes success and victory taste all the sweeter because it's more of a challenge to get to it because they're not as great at everything as they will be at later levels. So the longer you can stretch out getting to the higher levels, the better. Low level adventuring is good. It's good to do the grind. Just for the basic adventure, you want to have an XP budget of 2,700. Now right off the bat, you're going to need a boss and a sub-boss, in all likelihood. Some little variations, but this is just kind of a generic outline I'm trying to go through here. Your boss should be a challenge rating 3 creature or NPC, and your sub-boss should be a challenge rating 2. Combined, that is, what, 1,150 experience points. So you subtract that from your 2,700, so it gives you a XP budget to play with of 1,550 to design your encounters. You're going to want to use 50% of that 1,550 to sink into various critters, NPCs, support beasts that all directly tie to your main boss, sub-boss, villain. You want to use 25% of that 1,550 for setting up random encounters for when characters are traveling from the starting location to the adventure location. And another 25% of that XP you want to set aside to create secondary location encounters. While they're exploring the main area of the adventure, there should be a few little side locations that don't directly tie to the main plot, but might have some sort of setting flavor type encounter, namely local flora and fauna, or any kind of strange monsters, beasts. Not all encounters have to be necessarily enemies, and I'll get to that when I get to how you put together random encounters in particular. But secondary location encounters can also be used the same way. Sometimes they could be, meeting a creature NPC that's helpful and not necessarily something that's to attack. But as I say, those secondary location encounters, you only want to spend about 25% of your XP budget on them. They're not necessary to the plot. They can be skipped over. But the more thorough your player character group is as exploring everything, the more XP they'll have, so that when they defeat the final big boss, it can make a big difference between whether or not they all face that final boss as level 2 characters or if they face that final boss as level 3 characters. And then the final thing, just for your basic beginnings of an adventure outline, you want to choose an NPC or some sort of friendly creature of magic possibly, that will serve as the quest giver for the opening adventure. You want your player characters to already start off already employed by the person. And an example I like to use will have the characters have all been hired by a local sheriff to go take care of some sort of problem or threat that exists outside of the boundaries of that sheriff's domain. That way, there's no awkward, all the characters just start off in a tavern, and you just gotta all hope that they all decide to naturally get along together and to go talk to that interesting looking bard NPC you have sitting at the bar that you need them to talk to, but that they decide to never even bother with, and they come up with their own things to go do and completely frustrate you as a DM. You can avoid all of that. At the very beginning of the adventure, they are already employed. Have it start off where they're at the sheriff's office or at the whatever the quest giver's location is, and at the very beginning is that they've already accepted it. You just state that out. You've already accepted it, and then you can have that NPC be telling them all about what they need them to go do. Give them some time to go around the starting location, get some additional equipment or any other things they might think of after they hear what the scenario is, and have a little time to think about how they want to approach it. What do you do for a starting location? A starting location can be almost anything. A town or a village are ideal. A city is a little bit too large. Really exotic locations, similar to the city, The reason why a town or village is better is it should feel realistic to the players that a bunch of first level characters would have been tapped by the locals to go solve whatever is threatening them. If it's a big city, then, why aren't they sending out the King's Guard or the militia or getting the Mages Guild or much more powerful beings that dwell within a larger scale location? They should be handling that. Why are they just letting a bunch of first level nobodies deal with that? That's why it's best to start off in someplace small, a village or a town. Overall, though, all you really need to determine for what the location is, besides kind of a general idea of who's living there, rough estimate of the population, basic demographic breakdown, 50% human, 20% halfling, 30% dwarf, that kind of a thing. And you'll need to come up with just a small handful of NPCs, not even a full handful. You just need you need your quest giver. You're going to need a location and an NPC they can buy equipment and supplies from. Limited church services, I would recommend. Nothing so full scale where dead characters can be brought back and resurrected or anything like that, but a place where they could potentially get some minor healing or some health potions or something. You don't necessarily want them having access to a full-blown magic shop right off the bat. And also you will want to have an inn or some other sort of barracks situation where the characters can rest and sleep as part of a base kind of setup. After you have a basic idea of what your starting location is and what's in it, then you start to worry about exactly what the nature of the quest that the quest giver is giving. So you need to figure out exactly how does the boss and the sub-boss that you have chosen, how do they directly threaten your starting location? Are they, the leaders of a band of goblins that plans to invade the town in a big, massive, violent, bloody raid? Are they bandits that have been, picking off tradesmen coming along this one little bit of road that comes to and from this location and thus disrupting its entire ability to get supplies from outside of its immediate area? Is it a cult that's, infiltrating the society and is kidnapping young girls to take them off for some sort of nefarious ritual out in the woods?
We here at King Waspinator Studios disavow our past self from the year 2020 and our proposed adventure idea about girls being dragged off into the forest for nefarious purposes, for obvious reasons. I mean, what are we playing at here, guys?
That it needs to feel like it's a real threat to that location, and as to why that starting quest giver is promising gold or some other reward to get these players to go deal with the threat. The quest giver should only know just barely enough about what's going on to get the players to the location of their first combat encounter. The quest giver should not have too many specific ideas about the exact nature of what the threat is. In fact, you want to try to, at this point and onward through much of the opening segment of the game up until they actually get to their first encounter, you want to try to use misdirection a little bit, especially if you have a bunch of experienced Dungeons & Dragons players. You want to figure out what their expectations are, and you want to find ways not to just full-on subvert them for the sake of subverting them, but you want to be able to keep people on their toes. So you want to be able to pull the rug out from under their expectations a little bit as possible. However, if the players do think to do it when they're in town or village or whatever your starting location is, and they're dealing with some of the other NPCs that are selling supplies or church services or whatnot, if the players ask about the threat to those NPCs should be able to dole out little bits of info or even more misinformation. You should predetermine what those NPCs might know about this threat ahead of time as much as possible. And like I said, thwart expectations. You're setting them up to think, okay, we're going to go to this roadside bridge right on the outskirts of the county, and we're going to face some bandits. But when they get there, they find out that the bandits are actually some cultists and that are controlling a bunch of poor peasant villagers that they've kidnapped from a nearby village. And so the player characters immediately run in, and then you can start kind of testing them with how you designed this opening encounter and what they're facing. You want to test their morality, which doesn't seem on the surface like a big deal, but will have a huge effect on how you write your campaign going forward after the first adventure is over. Because you need to get a good sense of, as I've said before, you want to know if these guys are going to be heroes or are they going to be murder hobos. Are they just going to kill everything in sight? Or are they actually going to try to think tactfully? Are they going to try to negotiate? Are they going to try to use stealth? Or are they just going to go running and screaming with their weapons drawn and a swath of red violence away from treasure and reward? You want to design your opening encounter with tactics in mind. You want to put a little thought into exactly how the location is set up. Any ways you can bottleneck the character's movement from one point to another across the location is good. A bridge across a river, a canyon, anything like that is helpful. And yeah, you can't just allow it to only be something that can be completed as a combat. Combat should be the most obvious, and obviously this is a chance to, especially if you have new players involved, to give them a taste of what the combat system is like and see how well they're going to handle it and, get people used to things. But there should be ways built into this opening encounter where the players can complete the encounter through either using stealth or negotiation in terms of getting the enemies to surrender, give up, or to get some sort of critical information out of them that helps reveal what the further mystery is. And that is, I guess, the key thing that has to be in this encounter, beyond any bits of treasure or what kind of critters that they end up fighting, is they have to get a vital clue that will then lead them to the adventure threshold. Oh, and the first encounter, I would say you should only have it anywhere between 15 to 25 miles away from your starting location. Characters travel up to a day away to get to that first encounter, but not much further, and not too much closer. You don't want to be too easy for them. You want the characters to have to think after they've completed that first encounter. Do we want to go back to the starting location and report and get some more supplies now that we've learned a few more things? Or do we want to go further on to the actual adventure setting without returning back to the starting location first? And in order to be able to get them to have to make that decision, they need to be about roughly a day's march away from where they started off from, because that way it actually means something in terms of the amount of time they have to sink into going back or not. So your adventure setting is another area adjacent to your starting location. You want it roughly 20 to 50 miles beyond where the first encounter was. So it's roughly 2 to 3 days march away from the starting location in total. And that area should probably be no more than 5 to 10 miles across in total area. It could be a little dark patch of forest, some hills with some ruins in it, an ancient elven city, any sort of like larger location that has some sort of defined boundary to it, that the characters can learn that the threat, the penultimate threat that they have to deal with to put an end to this crisis that's facing their starting location and the quest giver. And within that area, there should be sublocations. Now, the adventure threshold is the encounter they have as they reach the borders of this area and enter it. It could be it's something literal, as there being like a wall or fortification that they have to face and get past. It could be running into a team of bandits coming down out of the hills, heading back down to the road to go find out why the bandits that were at the bridge never reported. There could be a lot of different ways you can play it, but the characters, the NPCs, the monsters that they face should be part of the tree of creatures that are directly related to the boss and the sub-boss. And at the adventure threshold encounter, they should also, get more specifics about where they need to go specifically within the boundaries of the adventure setting to be able to find the final boss. Beyond that, you're going to need several sub-locations within your adventure setting. You can divide them into two groups. You got your primary locations and your secondary locations. Your secondary locations are, as I talked about before, these are kind of side encounters that do not directly relate to the actual plot, but they are places within your general adventure area that can be explored and has something there to find and confront. But you're going to need a few actual primary locations. Beyond your adventure threshold, which like I said is whatever border encounter the characters have as they enter the adventure region. You're also going to need a gathering spot, which will be some sort of central public arena of sorts, where the forces that follow the boss character or the sub-boss character would typically gather and have meetings. It could be a place where prisoners are being held. It could be a church. It could be, like a big bonfire where goblins, like to have a party that's down below from the little goblin fortress. There's a couple different ways you can play what your gathering spot is. But it's a place for the characters to have their first meeting with the bad guys. Their first encounter, take out whatever it was, easy peasy Japanesey, head on down the road. Your adventure threshold should be a relatively medium level encounter, about roughly 150 XP for a 3-player group. Just enough to get a taste of the danger, but make them feel like, okay, yeah, we can take this. Their first meeting the enemy when they reach the gathering spot location should be their first indication that, oh, this is going to be tough, and we're going to have to, think, keep our fingers crossed, and actually, knuckle under and pay attention to what we're doing, because this isn't just going to be a cakewalk. It's a chance to be exposed to the full might. It might be an excuse for the characters to meet the main villain, but have them leave, and the characters have to deal with the chaos with what other followers are there at the gathering spot, and so they can face the boss again later. So anyway, after you deal with your gathering spot location, you'll have to have a fortification for the characters to get through to reach the bosses. The fortification could be a literal fort, it could be a ruined castle, it could be an unruined castle, it could be a series of tunnels or caves, a proper dungeon. It has to be some sort of structured location that, like I said, it's a bottleneck kind of thing. It forces the characters to have to go through a narrow channel, face threats as they get through the fortification, because the fortification will have defenses directly tied to the boss. And either once inside to the center of the fortification, or once they get beyond the fortification, they will find the sub-boss and big boss lairs. Now, it's up to you whether or not you want the sub-boss or the big boss to be the primary villain. The big boss is basically just the strongest thing they will fight, and it's possible that that could also be the thing that's in charge of this little faction that the characters are dealing with. Or the big boss could just be the big lumbering super creature that's under the control of the nefarious but more intelligent sub-boss. Or the sub-boss can just be a trusted lieutenant for the leading big boss. It's up to you. Optionally, within your adventure setting, you might also want to set up some sort of resupply location, depending on how the players seem to be handling their equipment. Are they running low on arrows? Are they going to need more health potions? Did no one think to bring any rope? And oh my god, we're going to need some rope. There should be something there in that forest or hill valley or whatever it is. Some friendly NPC monster, someone, an old hermit, somebody who might be able to help them out. Or maybe just coming across a supply cache of goblin materials that's left unguarded and like, oh, we can grab some stuff we need from here. Give them some chance to resupply on the fly in a limited fashion before moving into the final confrontation phases of the adventure. And generally, I'd say you want about 1d4+1 additional secondary locations to pepper around your area. For random encounters is a fun little thing you can do with your players to help optionally get them more experience, but kind of leave it a little bit danger of chance. Maybe they don't even have an encounter. I generally say you should have 3 per day of travel. You should have a random encounter roll in the morning, a random encounter roll in the afternoon, and a random encounter roll in the evening, but only while characters are traveling. Having random encounters at a fixed campsite location I mean, it's doable, but it's not really necessary, especially for a starting adventure. You don't want to like overburden the players with too much going on too fast. But it's a way to give them a chance to earn a bit more XP and to kind of vary things up. The way I like to do it is I let the players roll a die. If you got 3 players, that dice will be a die 6. If you got 4 players, a die 8. Or if you got 5 players, a die 10. Now I'll write down a little list of encounters. We're just going to go with the 3-player options. So say you have your lead character, the one who's taking point, or the one who's driving the wagon, the one who's in charge of the forward motion of the group. Have them roll for the random encounter. They're going to roll a dice 6. If they roll a 6, no encounter. If they roll a 4 or 5, they have a friendly encounter. If they roll a 2 or 3, they'll face some sort of basic foe. And if they roll a 1, they will have an extremely deadly encounter with some sort of local monster that could potentially kill at least one of the player characters and force them to have to retreat.
Well, obviously I disavow all of that. Type the word in the comments if you're still following along at this point.
As you scale up with more players, you use a larger sided die, so they'll have slightly different odds on hitting a friendly encounter, a no encounter, or a foe encounter. But you always want to have the die roll of 1 be your deadly encounter, and a die roll of 6 be no encounter. Now, as the characters travel through a region and crisscross it, every time they have an encounter off that list, say you roll 3, after they've had that encounter, strike what you have under slot 3 off the random encounter. When they go back through that same area and roll again, if they roll a 3, that's also a no encounter, and if they roll a 6, that's a no encounter. Whatever it is that they previously rolled will add to the amount of no encounters as they clear out the area of potential opponents. As I said, after you subtract the XP totals for your challenge rating 3 boss and your challenge rating 2 sub boss, that will leave you with a basic adventure budget of $1,550. Now, as we break these things up into subcategories, my recommendation is to always round up a little bit. There's a possibility, because of some encounters being location-based or because of the random encounters, that player characters might not necessarily get or find all the possible experience that they can. So fluffing up encounters here and there by a few points, rounding up from 175 XP to 200 XP, that ain't going to hurt anybody. But as I said, though, you want, of your remaining XP after you've subtracted your bosses, you want roughly 50% of it to be for enemies that directly support the boss villain, 25% for random encounters, and 25% for your setting flavor encounters at secondary locations. You're going to have a basic encounter tree. You'll have that written down. This will help give you a basic blueprint to keep the adventure running. As you're going through, characters wrap up first encounter. Okay, so what's next? This way, if you have your encounter tree just jotted down, you'll already have something prepared, so you know what to keep telling your players to get them to go. Okay, then we go over here and do this, and we go over there and do that. So you're going to have your encounter tree is going to be the starting point. Then there's going to be your first combat encounter. After that, random encounters as they travel to the adventure setting, adventure threshold encounter, possible secondary location encounters within the adventure setting, the meeting the enemy encounter at your gathering spot. You're going to have an assault the stronghold encounter as the characters push their way through whatever sort of fortification that you're having in your adventure setting. And then either they're going to face the big boss and then the sub-boss, or they will face the sub-boss and then the big boss. Whichever one is the actual true leading villain of this, you want to have them be the last thing that the characters fight. Now, if you're using your big boss just as a hulking monster that's actually under the control of your sub-boss, who's, say, a cultist or something like that, you want to have them go ahead and face the big boss first. After they defeated him, they can then unlock and get to the sub-boss's lair, and potentially, since by that point they've just defeated a creature even more stronger than them, this is a good opportunity if you want to have a NPC villain that the characters actually take custody of and capture and to take back as a prisoner, as opposed to just slaughter everything in sight. If you're going just more for just like combat nyuks and not worrying about taking prisoners kind of scenario, then go ahead and have your sub-boss just be, you know, like a leading lieutenant, and the big boss be the big bad that you fight at the end. It's maybe a bit more climactic that way, but having the sub-boss be the actual villain gives you a potential for further plot threads to keep developing as adventuring goes on beyond the conclusion of the first adventure. Now, for your bonus XP budget, in case you have 4 or 5 players end up showing up instead of just 3, like I said, that's a total of 1,800 extra experience points to add for additional encounters. 50% of that, a total of 900 XP, you will want to just make to have even more potential random encounters. This is also part of why I say that the adventure setting should be a day or 2 beyond where the first encounter is. That way, if you have a smaller group of only 3 people, then only have it be 1 day beyond, like an extra 20 miles, enough to get them 3 potential random encounters before they get there. But say you have a group of 5 players, then make it 50 miles beyond where the first combat encounter was located before they get to the adventure threshold. That way they have a chance for up to 6 random encounters. And this is a way you can build more experience into the game. You want to use roughly 450 experience out of that 1,800 for additional secondary locations for your adventure setting on top of the ones you've already determined for the basic 3-person adventure outline. And then another 450 experience to add some additional reinforcements to primary encounters. Maybe a couple extra animals, an extra strong creature here and there, just to up the challenge a bit. You can hold off as a DM before nailing this down until you've already seen what your player characters are and how they're handling things, just so you can specifically tailor the challenge for them so they feel like they got something that is directly relevant to their character's classes, abilities, or skills or whatnot, or makes them feel like they've done something important and have faced something that strikes them on a personal note. Also, you will want to roll for 3 treasure hoards, 3 major treasure hoards out of your DMG, plus 1 additional treasure hoard for each character beyond 3 players. So if you're rolling for 4 players, you will want to have 4 treasure hoards. If you have 5 treasure hoards. But the basis, roll for 3 treasure hoards. Go ahead and add up all the gold and silver coins and copper coins together, and go ahead and determine what all the magic items are, and then also add an additional 1d4 basic healing potions. You will want to figure out a couple points, locations or encounters where characters would find an actual chunk of treasure hoard and not just randomly generated personal treasure that they might find searching bodies. My recommendation would be potentially have a small treasure hoard at the very first encounter, maybe also including 1 magic item, but magic items shouldn't be included in the hoard. Magic items, aside from healing potions, should be found in the possession of the foes the characters defeat. That way, once they defeat this bandit that was giving them a hard time, they get to have that magic sword that the bandit himself was using against them. So it's a more personalized kind of reward, and it's not just something they found in a box. But that way you're not unbalancing it by adding even more magic items on top to the ones that are randomly generated. Go ahead and randomly generate your magic items, but distribute them to specific NPCs that the characters will face as they go along. For any additional magic items that are generated from hordes that were added to the basic 3 hordes from having more players, you might want to put those magic items into some of the secondary locations, so they count as magic items that are not guaranteed to be found in the course of the adventure. And you want to have your largest pile of treasure with your final fight. You'll want to have some sort of treasure hold potentially to be found within the fortification area, and then you'll want to have a really minor treasure reward at the very first combat encounter. And as I said, if characters that they're rummaging pockets of fallen people, in those cases you can run through the small personal hoard chart that's in your DMG. And for the most part, that's about it. Just to reinforce just a few story tips. As I say, early misdirection is good if you want to pull the rug out of your players' expectations. You want to tell them that they're facing goblins. It turns out they're not actually facing goblins, or that the goblins are actually good guys and they're being forced to do this by something else. You're telling them that they're going to go investigate a cult. There's some other twist there. You want to make sure there's some sort of basic twist. Not something that's a totally outright lie, but something that sets what they thought was going on its ear, that reveals what the actual greater true threat is. You'll want to test the player's morality in terms of how they deal with the fallen bodies, how they deal with taking treasure from the dead, how they deal with any potential civilian hostages or prisoners that they encounter, people who are being forced to do things as opposed to people who are willingly committing acts of evil. These are all little things you can do just to kind of get a feel for what kind of moral character your players are bringing to the game. You should choose 3 challenge rating 8 to 10 level villains that will lurk elsewhere in the larger setting around what you've already built so far with your starting location and your first adventure setting. You want to pepper some basic clues, hints, and a little foreshadowing throughout the first adventure encounters, or anything that the characters learn about the setting or history, the hint at the existence that there are these larger threats somewhere out there. And just leave it up to the players to pick up on these things and decide on their own to want to investigate them later. These are ways to plant hooks for your mid-tier epic campaign, villains and goals for the characters to then go investigate and find out and unravel. And you'll want to add one more, a challenge rating 10 to 13 villain that directly ties to the nature of the introductory adventure's main villain, your big boss or your sub-boss. You want to have them have something higher up in power that's far behind the scenes. However, you do not want to be specific about where it's located and be very vague about your references. And beyond that, then you can start thinking a little bit about the bigger picture of the setting. You have your basic starting location, a little town or a village. You got your little adventure setting, a little bit of wilderness for the characters to explore. What's beyond that? You get a piece of paper out. You can just use regular note paper, or you can get some proper graph paper, or you can get a big old erase board like I have right here. So what you're going to want to do is in the center of your map, your basic map should be about 200 miles across. So that roughly takes a little over a week for player characters to travel on foot from one end of the map all the way to the other. That's more than enough of a starting zone for characters between levels 1 to 5 at the barest minimum to have plenty of things to do with. And in the very center of that map, you'll put your starting location and then however far away your adventure setting is. And so after that, you need to start determining what's to the north, what's to the east, what's in the south, what's in the west. And there's a couple of basic things that pretty much any little basic starting setting needs beyond your starting town. You should have some sort of noble city-state. You should have some sort of rogue city-state. You should have some sort of non-human kingdom. And you should have 1 or 2 major wilderness areas. Beyond that, you can, of course, add all sorts of other additional kingdoms, towns, societies, barbarian tribes, all other sorts of stuff. It's also good for, at least for your basic area here, to kind of know what are your primary cults, guilds, and knightly orders and other factions that have influence over this region and that the common folk that the player characters are going to interact with will believe in, venerate, or follow. And I guess that's basically it. Basic outline of how to start a D&D campaign off relatively easily without having to buy a ton of extra supplements, just using the stuff from your basic books, your basic monster manual, your basic player's handbook. So good luck, guys. And, I don't know. I guess you see ya when the corona apocalypse is finally over. And I can finally start running games again and putting them on my channel. In the meantime, I don't know. I guess I have to come up with other kind of gaming content to put on here just for the sake of putting stuff on here. If you have any suggestions, feel free to leave something in the comment description below. hit like and subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. And until next time, stay waspinating.
Ah, there you are.
Stay waspinated.